Before the beginning, there was only the void. There was no up, no down. No light, no darkness in the way we understand it. There was no sound, no silence. It was quite simply chaos. A yawning, formless and infinite gap. It was not empty, but it was not full. It was a potential, a swirling, gaseous, and utterly vacant expanse of possibility. Imagine the feeling of falling in a dream, that sudden, weightless lurch and stretch that feeling into an eternity. That was chaos. It had no mind, no will, no consciousness. It simply was. And out of this unspace, this untime, something stirred. Not with a sound, not with a flash of light, but with a simple, profound act of separation. The first thing to truly be was Gaia. She was the earth. Her emergence was not violent. It was a gradual coalescing. Imagine, if you will, mist on a cool morning, how it seems to gather itself out of the air, thickening from a whisper of gray into a solid, damp blanket upon the ground. So too did Gaia gather herself from chaos. She became foundation. She became substance. She was the bedrock, the rich soil, the solid thing in a universe of nothing. With her existence came the first sensation. She could feel. She felt the dampness of her own hidden caves, the slow, patient grinding of her continental plates, the sharp newness of her mountain peaks. She was vast, a consciousness spread across an entire world, and she was for a long time entirely alone. From that same mysterious origin of chaos, others also separated, defining the new reality. Tartarus emerged. If Gaia was the foundation, Tartarus was the pit. He was the deep, dark, crushing underworld, a place as far below Gaia as the sky would one day be above her. He was a place of ending, a bronze-walled prison of absolute depth. Then came Erebus. This was the true, tangible darkness. Not the simple absence of light, but a heavy, primordial shadow that filled all the new corners and crevices of reality. And with him his sister, Nyx. She was night itself. A watchful, knowing, and powerful presence, cloaked in the shadows of Erebus. And finally, perhaps the most important of all, Eros. Love. Desire. This was not the cherubic child of later tales, but the fundamental force of creation. Eros was the energy that would bind all things together. He was the pulse of attraction, the cosmic necessity that would ensure that this new reality would not remain static, that it would grow and change and create. But for now, Gaia was the center of it all. The great, quiet, patient mother. She felt her own substance, her mountains pushing upward like a sleeper stretching beneath a blanket, her vast oceans carving their first beds. And yet she was incomplete. She was a world with no sky, a land with no heavens to gaze upon. And so in her solitude she dreamed. She dreamed of a companion, a covering, something to mirror her own vastness. And from her own being, without the need for Eros, she brought forth a son who would also be her equal, her partner. She brought forth Ouranos, the sky. He rose from her, a vast starry expanse. He was not a person, not yet, but a majestic blue blanket studded with the first glimmerings of starlight. He covered her completely, from her highest peak to her lowest valley. His mists were the first rains, and they fell upon her, and she felt a joy, a completeness, that she had never known. The earth and the sky were joined, and with the presence of Eros lingering in the cosmos, their union was inevitable. Ouranos looked down upon Gaia, and he loved her. He saw her beauty, her strength, her endless potential. And he descended upon her, covering her entirely. Their embrace was the first embrace. And from this union, the first generation of true, thinking beings was born. But this creation, this first act of divine love, would not be a simple one. It would be an act that would sow the seeds of the first betrayal, the first taste of fear, and the first hunger for power. The children of earth and sky were coming, and they would be giants. Gaia rejoiced as she felt the first new lives stirring within her. These were not formless potentials like chaos. These were distinct, powerful minds. They were the first gods. But Ouranos, the sky, looked upon them, and he did not feel the same joy. He felt something new. He felt unease. The first to be born were the 12 Titans. 6 sons and 6 daughters, magnificent and enormous, true rulers of the new world. There was Ouranos, the firstborn, a great flowing river god who encircled the entire world in his liquid embrace. His sister wife was Tethys, the nurse, the mother of the springs and rivers that fed the world from Ouranos' source. There was Hyperion, the High One, a being of pure light, the father of the sun, the moon, and the dawn. His sister wife was Theia, the divine, the goddess who gave gold, silver, and precious gems their glittering, shining quality. There was Kronos, the questioner, the titan of the intellect, of the inquiring mind, and the axis of the heavens around which the stars wheeled. His sister wife was Phoebe, the shining, a goddess of the moon and of prophecy, who would one day pass her oracle at Delphi down the generations. There was Cronos, the ram, a more enigmatic titan associated with the constellations of the south, a pillar of the cosmos. And there was Apetus, the piercer, the father of the next generation of titans who would prove so pivotal, Atlas, Prometheus, and Epimetheus. He was a god of craft, and perhaps of mortality. His sister wives, who did not pair with a single brother, were Themis, who was the embodiment of divine law, order, and custom, the very concept of what is right, and Mnemosyne, who was memory itself, the mother of the muses, the keeper of all that was and all that would be. These were the Titans, powerful, beautiful, and awesome. Gaia loved them. But Ouranos looked at them, and he saw rivals. He saw strength that could one day challenge his own. And then Gaia bore him more children. And these were different. The next children to emerge from the union of earth and sky were not as perfect in their father's eyes. They were the 3 Cyclopes: Brontes the Thunderer, Steropes the Lightner, and Arges the Vivid Flasher. They were giants like their Titan siblings, but they were possessed of a raw, chaotic energy. And each had only one single, round eye set directly in the middle of his forehead. This eye burned with the fire of the forge. They were master craftsmen from the moment of their birth, beings who understood the secrets of metal, fire, and thunder. The sounds they made were not words, but the percussive crack of a hammer on an anvil, the deep rumble of a distant storm. Ouranos looked at them, at their singular, burning eyes, at their immense, misshapen power, and he felt a new sensation. He felt disgust. He saw them not as children, but as flaws, as monsters. And still Gaia bore more children. Her last and most terrible brood. The Hecatoncheires, the 100-handed ones. There were 3 of them: Katos the striker, Briareos the vigorous, and Gyges the large-limbed. These beings were creation at its most chaotic. They were mountains of flesh, rage, and strength. Each possessed 50 heads, which lolled and turned, their 50 faces looking in all directions at once. And from their broad, powerful shoulders sprouted 100 immense arms. They were strength personified, a living, breathing engine of destruction. The sound of their movement was the sound of a rock slide. The sound of their voices was the sound of an earthquake. When Ouranos, the starry sky, looked upon these 300 arms, these 150 heads, his unease and disgust curdled into something far darker. He felt fear. This was power he could not control. This was a strength that dwarfed his own. These children were an affront to the beautiful, orderly cosmos he presided over. They were to him abominations. And so he acted. He looked at the three Cyclopes with their fiery eyes, and the three Hecatoncheires with their forest of arms, and he did a thing of terrible cruelty. He seized them. He seized his own children, moments after their birth, and he refused to let them see the light. He took them and he thrust them back. He pushed them deep, deep into the hidden places of their mother, Gaia, back into the secret, dark hollows of the earth. He imprisoned his children within the body of his wife. Gaia cried out. It was a pain she had never imagined. It was not just the emotional agony of a mother seeing her children abused. It was a physical, crushing, agonizing weight. Her children, her monstrous, powerful, and beloved children, were trapped inside her. She felt their immense, struggling forms deep within her, a constant pressure, a bloating sickness that filled her with pain and sorrow. And she began to hate her husband. She hated his starry beauty, his suffocating presence. She hated the rain he sent, which now felt like a violation. She hated the way he covered her each night, a constant, heavy reminder of his tyranny. But Ouranos was not finished. He looked at his other children, the 12 beautiful Titans. And though he did not imprison them in the same way, he kept them hidden. He kept them pressed within Gaia, refusing to let them rise and take their place in the world. He ruled alone, the single, supreme monarch of the cosmos, admiring his own reflection in the shining stars, while his wife groaned in agony beneath him, her body a prison for her own offspring. This could not last. The pressure inside Gaia was building. It was the pressure of the Hecatoncheires' 300 arms pushing against her bedrock. It was the pressure of the Cyclops' internal fire, a volcanic heat. And it was the pressure of her own boiling, bitter resentment. The earth was groaning, sick and swollen. She had to act. In the deepest, most secret part of herself, in a place where Ouranos' light never reached, Gaia conceived a new element. She willed it into existence from her own pain. It was a metal, pale gray and impossibly hard. It was adamant. And from this magical, unbreakable substance, she began to fashion a tool. She worked in secret, her whole being focused on this one task. She shaped the gray metal, honing its edge until it was sharper than any mountain peak, more durable than any diamond. She crafted a great curved blade, a sickle. When it was finished, she felt its cold, heavy promise in her core. Now she needed a warrior. She called out to her children, the Titans, still trapped within her. Her voice was not a sound but a vibration, a whisper through stone and soil. "My children," she pleaded, her voice trembling with sorrow and rage. "We are suffering. Your father, our father, has acted with monstrous cruelty. He has imprisoned your brothers. He oppresses us all. This cannot stand. We must have vengeance. We must have freedom." There was a long, terrible silence. The Titans heard her. They felt her pain. And they were afraid. They knew the power of Ouranos. He was the sky. He was total. To challenge him was to challenge reality itself. They huddled in the dark, silent. All but one. A voice, cold and ambitious, echoed back to her from the darkness. "Mother, I will do this thing." It was Kronos, the youngest of the Titans. He was not the strongest like Oceanus, nor the brightest like Hyperion. He was the most cunning, the most daring, and the one who harbored the deepest resentment for his father. He did not fear Ouranos, or rather, his ambition was greater than his fear. Gaia felt a surge of dark, triumphant joy. She passed the great, gray, adamantine sickle to her son, his hand closing around its hilt. And together they laid their trap. The plan was simple, and it was brutal. Gaia, the great earth, would set the ambush. Kronos, her son, would be the weapon. Gaia waited, her vast consciousness coiled in anticipation. She waited for the coming of Nyx, the night. As the shadows of Erebus spread across the world, Ouranos, the sky, began his nightly descent. He was arrogant, blinded by his own perceived supremacy. He saw no threat. He saw only his beautiful earth, spread out beneath him, and he moved to embrace her, to cover her as he did every night, his mind filled with the desire that Eros pulsed through the cosmos. He descended, his starry form settling upon the land. And as he did, Gaia acted. She held him fast, her mountains gripping his edges, her plains refusing to yield. And in that same moment, she signaled to her son. From a hidden cleft in the earth, a place of ambush, Kronos emerged. He was terrible to behold, his form vast and powerful, and in his hand he gripped the pale gray sickle of adamant. Ouranos saw him. In that heartbeat, he saw his son, his beautiful youngest son, rising up against him with a weapon of their mother's making. He saw the cold resolve in Kronos' eyes. And for the first time, the Lord of the Sky knew true, paralyzing terror. He tried to pull away, to rise back to his zenith, but Gaia held him firm. He was trapped. Kronos raised the sickle. He did not hesitate. With one tremendous, sweeping motion, he brought the unbreakable blade down upon his father. He severed the connection that bound sky and earth. He mutilated his own father, cutting away the source of his generative power. It was an act of profound, cosmic violence. Ouranos screamed. It was a sound that had never been heard before. It was the sound of agony, of betrayal, of a god's pain. It was a scream that ripped through the fabric of the new universe, shaking the stars in their places. He recoiled, pulling away from Gaia with a final, violent lurch. He rose, wounded and diminished, into the highest, most distant reaches of the cosmos, a brazen sky, now forever separated from the earth. He would never again descend to cover her. The first and greatest king had been deposed. But the consequences of this act were immediate, and they were profound. As Kronos swung the sickle, dark drops of his father's divine blood, his ichor, fell from the blade. They rained down upon the body of Gaia, the earth. And she, in her pain and fury, received them. From these drops of blood, new life was born. Terrible life. First the Ouranos, the Furies, three sisters of vengeance, with snakes for hair and eyes that wept blood. Alecto the unceasing, Megira the grudging, and Tisiphone the avenger of murder. They were born from the first act of patricide, and their purpose was singular, to hunt and torment any who spilled the blood of their own family. They were a living, breathing curse, born from the crime that had just been committed. From other drops of blood that struck the earth, the giants were conceived. Not born, not yet, but they lay dormant within Gaia, a future generation of chaos and war, waiting for their own time to rise against the heavens. And then there was the sickle itself, and the severed parts of Ouranos. Kronos, in his terrible victory, flung the weapon and its grisly burden away from him. They flew through the air, arcing over the land and falling into the great sea that encircled the world, the sea of their brother, Oceanus. As the divine essence touched the water, the sea began to churn. It foamed, a brilliant, white churning froth that spread for miles. And from the center of this sea foam, a new being arose. She was not a titan. She was not a primordial. She was something new. She was the goddess Aphrodite, the foam-born. She was beauty perfected, desire made manifest. She rose from the waves on a scallop shell, and as she stepped ashore on the island of Cythera, flowers bloomed beneath her feet. She was the goddess of love, beauty, and procreation, born from the most violent and terrible act of creation. The cosmos was changed. The silence that followed Ouranos' scream was heavy. Kronos stood, the new master of the universe. He was triumphant. He had done the impossible. He had overthrown the sky. His brothers and sisters, the other 11 titans, emerged from their earthy prison. They looked upon Kronos with awe and with fear. They saw the power he wielded. They saw the decisiveness of his action. And they bowed to him. They proclaimed him their king. The age of the titans had begun. Gaia was free from the oppressive weight of her husband. She was free from the constant pain of her imprisoned children. She had her victory. But her first act was to plead with her triumphant son. Kronos, she urged, your brothers, the Cyclopes and the Hecatoncheires, they are still trapped. They are your blood. Free them. Let them see the light. They are our family. Kronos looked at his mother. He had her power now. He had the throne. And he looked into the dark pits where his monstrous siblings were chained. He heard the volcanic rumble of the Cyclopes. He felt the earth-shaking power of the 100-handed. And he, just like his father, felt fear. He feared their strength. He feared their loyalty. He saw them not as brothers, but as potential usurpers, as weapons that could one day be turned against him. And so, in his first act as king, Kronos defied his mother. He refused her. He left his brothers chained in the depths of Tartarus, ensuring their prison was even stronger than before. Gaia was horrified. She had traded one tyrant for another. She had instigated a terrible crime, only to see her own son repeat the very sins of his father. And in that moment, as Kronos turned his back on his chained brothers and his grieving mother, the seeds of his downfall were sown. Gaia, the earth, and Ouranos, the distant, wounded sky, uttered a prophecy. They spoke it to their arrogant son, their voices a rumble from the earth and a whisper from the stars. You have overthrown your father, they warned. And just as you have done, so too shall it be done to you. You will be overthrown by your own child. This prophecy, this curse, it would define the entire reign of Kronos. The reign of Kronos began. The Titans, his 11 siblings, took their places as the rulers of the cosmos. They were the new pantheon. Hyperion and Theia governed the sun and moon. Oceanus and Tethys ruled the waters. Coeus and Phoebe held the oracles and the axis of the heavens. Themis instituted the first laws of nature, the cycles of the seasons. And Kronos sat on the throne, the king of all. Under his rule, the world entered a period that later poets would call the Golden Age. It was a time of perceived perfection. Mortals, the first race of them, were said to live like gods. They felt no sorrow, no toil, and no old age. When their lives ended, they simply lay down and passed into a gentle sleep. The earth, under the care of the Titans, produced all food in abundance. There was no need for farming, no need for war. There was a simple, peaceful, and eternal springtime. It sounds idyllic. A perfect, quiet, and gentle world. But this peace was a lie. It was a beautiful, shining surface, and beneath it, in the heart of the king himself, there was a gnawing, icy dread. Kronos could not forget the prophecy. You will be overthrown by your own child. He who had wielded the sickle. He who had heard his father's scream. He knew what a son was capable of. He knew the bite of ambition. He saw his own treachery mirrored in the faces of all potential heirs. He had taken his sister Rhea as his queen. She was the Titaness of motherhood, of the earth's gentle flow, a kind and nurturing spirit. And in time she conceived their first child. Kronos was filled not with joy, but with a cold, sickening terror. This child, this new life, was not a blessing. It was a threat. It was the living, breathing embodiment of his own doom. Rhea gave birth. The child was a goddess, beautiful and bright. She named her Hestia. She was the goddess of the hearth, of the home, of the sacred, steady flame. Rhea held her, her heart swelling with a mother's love, and she presented her to her husband, her king. Kronos looked at the infant goddess. He saw the prophecy. He saw the sickle. He saw his father's pain. And he did a thing more monstrous than Ouranos had ever dared. Ouranos had hidden his children. He had imprisoned them, but he had not harmed them. Kronos, in his precise and calculated paranoia, reached out. He took the newborn Hestia from Rhea's arms. Rhea cried out, confused, reaching for her. But Kronos was swift. He opened his divine mouth, and he swallowed his daughter whole. He consumed her. He sent her down into the divine darkness of his own immortal stomach, a prison from which there could be no escape. Rhea's shriek of disbelief and horror was met with Kronos' cold, grim satisfaction. The threat was neutralized. The prophecy was averted. He was safe. But the prophecy was not so easily undone. Rhea, in her profound grief, conceived again. She bore a second daughter. This was Demeter, the goddess of the grain, of the harvest, of the earth's life-giving bounty. She was the future of the Golden Age, the one who would ensure its plenty. Rhea held her, her heart breaking, pleading with her husband with her eyes. Kronos did not relent. He took Demeter and he swallowed her, just as he had her sister. Rhea fell into a deep despair. But the cycles of creation continued. She bore a third daughter, Hera, a goddess of queenship, of marriage, of power. She had the eyes of a ruler, a noble and proud infant. Kronos swallowed Hera. Rhea's grief was now a cold, hard stone in her heart. She was a mother, but she had no children. She was a queen, but she was a prisoner. She began to hate her husband, just as Gaia had hated hers. She bore him a son, a god. She named him Hades. He was dark-haired, a quiet, solemn, and powerful child, the future lord of the hidden wealth of the earth and of the dead. Surely Kronos would spare his son, his first son. Kronos did not hesitate. He saw a son, and he saw a usurper. He swallowed Hades. Rhea conceived again. A second son, Poseidon. The child was brimming with a wild, untamable energy. You could almost hear the sound of the ocean, the crashing of waves, in his infant cry. He was the future shaker of the earth. Kronos seized Poseidon, and he swallowed him. 5 children, 5 gods, all born and all unliving, trapped in the gullet of their father. Kronos sat on his throne, presiding over his silent, perfect golden age, while inside him, his own children waited, conscious and imprisoned in a living tomb. Rhea was broken. Her mind was a wasteland of grief. She could not bear this any longer. As she felt the stirrings of a new life within her, her 6th child, she knew this one must be saved. She could not watch another child be stolen from her. She turned to the only beings in the cosmos who would understand her pain. She turned to the one who had uttered the prophecy in the first place. She went to her parents, Gaia the earth and Ouranos, the distant, wounded sky. She wept, her tears falling like rain upon the earth, and Gaia felt her daughter's sorrow. "Mother," Rhea whispered, "he is just like his father. He is a monster. He has taken my children. 5 times I have been a mother, and 5 times I have been made childless. I am bearing another. Help me. Help me save this one." Gaia's heart, hardened by her own son's betrayal, softened for her daughter. She remembered her own pain, her own trapped children. She would not let this cycle repeat. "It will be done," Gaia rumbled. "This child will be your vengeance. He will be the one to fulfill the prophecy. He will be the one to bring your other children back into the light." Together, the 3 generations, grandmother, mother, and unborn child, formed a new conspiracy. a plan to deceive the all-powerful king of the Titans. The plan was one of stealth and substitution. The child had to be born in absolute secrecy, far from the paranoid, all-seeing gaze of Kronos. Gaia chose the place. The island of Crete, a jewel in the sea, and on that island a cavern hidden deep within Mount Dicte. The Dictean Cave. As Rhea's time approached, she feigned illness. She shrouded herself in her chambers, her loyal attendants sworn to silence. Kronos, impatient, waited outside, eager to neutralize this final sixth threat. But under the cover of the deepest night, with Nyx herself providing a cloak of shadows, Rhea fled. She journeyed, her body heavy with child, across the sea to Crete. Gaia guided her, the very earth smoothing the path before her. She arrived at the mountain, and she descended into the breathing, living darkness of the cave. The air inside was cool and damp. It smelled of wet stone and ancient soil. It was a place of the earth, a true sanctuary. Water dripped from stalactites, the only sound, like a slow, patient clock ticking in the dark. And there, in the heart of the world, hidden from the sky, Rhea gave birth to her third son. She named him Zeus. He was a beautiful child, strong and bright. His first cry, however, was a danger. It was the cry of a god, and it threatened to echo across the cosmos and alert Kronos. But Gaia was prepared. She had summoned guardians. The Kuretes. These were warrior spirits of the earth, demigods clad in bronze armor. As Zeus cried, the Kuretes outside the cave began their wardens. They beat their bronze shields with their bronze spears, a deafening, rhythmic, clanging percussion. It was the sound of a frantic battle, a wild, chaotic noise that masked the infant's cry completely, confusing any who might be listening. Rhea held her son. She held him for only a few precious moments. She looked into his eyes, the future of the cosmos, and her heart ached with the sacrifice she had to make. She could not keep him. To stay with him would be to betray him. She entrusted him to the care of the mountain nymphs, Adrastea and Ida, and to the divine goat Amalthea, who would nurse the young god with her own milk, a food of immortality. Rhea's part was not over. She had to return. She had to face Kronos. Before she left Crete, Gaia gave her the final piece of the deception. It was not a child. It was a stone. The Omphalos stone. It was large, oblong, roughly the size and weight of a newborn infant. Rhea swaddled the stone. She wrapped it in the same fine, woolen blankets she had prepared for her son. She held it to her chest, her face a mask of practiced, agonizing grief. She returned to the palace of the Titans on Mount Othries. She ascended to the throne room, her steps slow and heavy. Kronos was waiting. His golden eyes were cold, impatient. "You have borne the child," he stated. It was not a question. Rhea, weeping, her voice choked with a sorrow that was both real and a performance, nodded. "He is here," she whispered. And she presented the swaddled bundle to her king. Kronos looked at the bundle. He saw only the shape of a child, the final link in the chain of prophecy. He felt no pity, no remorse. He felt only relief. This was the end of his fear. He took the bundle from her arms. He did not look at it. He did not unwrap it. His paranoia, which had been so precise, was now blinded by his arrogance. He believed he had won. He opened his great mouth, and just as he had done 5 times before, he swallowed the child whole. He swallowed the stone. The Omphalos stone slid down his divine throat. It was heavy. It was cold. It was not the soft, warm life of an infant god. But Kronos, in his haste, convinced himself it was done. He felt the weight settle in his gut, joining the 5 other gods who waited in that living prison. He turned to Rhea, a grim final satisfaction on his face. The prophecy was broken. His reign was secure. Rhea fled from his presence, her body shaking not from sorrow this time, but from a terrible, trembling, triumphant hope. She had done it. She had saved him. And far away in the dark, safe and secret cave on the island of Crete, the infant Zeus drank the milk of a goat, his cries masked by the clash of spears. He was growing, and he was growing fast. The future king of the gods, the lord of the sky, was safe, biding his time, nourished by the earth, hidden from the heavens. The trap was set. The clock was ticking. Time for gods moves differently. On the hidden island of Crete, Zeus grew at a phenomenal rate. He was fed on the rich, divine milk of Amalthea and the honey given by sacred bees. He was raised by the nymphs, played among the Curetes, his strength growing with every passing day. He was a child of the earth, hidden from the sky, and he inherited the cunning of his mother, the strength of his father, and the deep, abiding patience of his grandmother. He grew from an infant to a boy, from a boy to a man, in what seemed like a heartbeat. He was a god in his full, magnificent prime. He was tall and powerful, his eyes crackling with the barely contained energy of a coming storm. He knew his story. The nymphs had told him. He knew of his father Kronos. He knew of his swallowed brothers and sisters. He knew of the prophecy. His entire life had been a preparation for a single purpose: vengeance, liberation. But he could not challenge Kronos with strength alone. Kronos was the king of the cosmos, his power absolute. Zeus needed a different weapon. He needed guile. He sought out the wisest being he could find. This was Medes the cunning. She was a Titaness, a daughter of Oceanus, a goddess of practical wisdom and the cleverest mind in all of creation. Zeus found her, and he laid his story bare. He spoke of his father's cruelty, his mother's grief, and his siblings' prison. Medes, who had long served Kronos but felt no love for his tyrannical rule, saw the tide of power shifting. She saw in Zeus the force of the future. And she agreed to help. "You cannot defeat him with force," Medes advised, her voice like the shifting of leaves. "His body is a fortress, and his power is supreme. You must unwit him. You must strike from within." Together they devised a new plan. A new deception. Medes, a mistress of potions and herbs, prepared a special draught. It was a mixture of mustard and wine, or perhaps a magical elixir known only to her. It was not a poison to kill. It was an emetic, a potion powerful enough to make even the king of the Titans violently, cosmically sick. The next step was to get the potion to Kronos. Zeus, his divine nature veiled, his power hidden, traveled to Mount Othries, the fortress of the Titans. In many tellings of this story, he presented himself not as a son, but as a new cupbearer to the king, a charming and unnoticed servant. In other versions, it is Medes herself who cunningly gains an audience with the king. In either case, the plan was the same: to get the potion to Kronos. Zeus, or perhaps Medes, waited for the right moment. A great feast of the Titans. Kronos was seated at his throne, Rhea at his side, her face a mask of stone, showing no recognition of the young man who was her son, her hope. Zeus, his hand steady, his heart pounding with the rhythm of a coming war, brought his father the cup. It was filled with the potion Medes had prepared, masked by the sweetness of nectar. "A new vintage, my king," Zeus said, his voice level and respectful. "A gift to honor your eternal reign." Kronos, arrogant and unsuspecting, took the cup. He saw no threat in this lowly servant. He saw no danger in a cup of wine. He raised it and he drank. He drained the cup. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Kronos' eyes widened. A deep, seismic cramp seized his divine stomach. A terrible, churning nausea rose in his throat. He had swallowed a stone, and that stone was now moving. He staggered to his feet, clutching his middle, his body convulsive jelly spasming. The other titans scattered, afraid of their king's sudden, violent illness. Kronos doubled over and he retched. It was an explosion, a reversal of his tyranny. The first thing to emerge, shooting from his mouth and landing with a crash, was the Omphalos stone. It flew through the air and landed at Delphi, where it would one day be revered as a sacred object, the navel of the world. Kronos groaned, but the potion was not finished with him. His body was seized by another, more powerful convulsion. And then they came. One by one, his children returned to the light. They emerged not as infants, but as they were meant to be, fully grown, powerful, and blazing with a divine, imprisoned rage. First came Poseidon. He emerged from his father's throat with a roar, the scent of salt and the sea filling the hall, a divine trident already half-formed in his mind. Then came Hades. He appeared as a shadow, a being of quiet, immense, and cold fury, his very presence seeming to draw the light from the room. Then Hera, her eyes flashing with the indignation of a queen, so long denied her throne. Then Demeter, who brought with her the scent of grain, but also the cold, hard anger of a barren winter. And finally Hestia, the firstborn, the last to be freed. She emerged in a column of warm, steady flame, her presence calm, but her judgment absolute. 5 gods born twice. They stood before their gasping, weakened father. And beside them, his power now fully revealed, stood their brother, their savior, Zeus. The 6 children of Kronos and Rhea stood together for the first time. The Olympians. Kronos looked at them. He saw his 5 swallowed children, and he saw the cupbearer, now radiating a power that matched his own. He saw the prophecy. He saw his mother, Gaia, and his father, Ouranos, their words echoing in his mind. He knew in that instant that his reign was over. His terror had brought about the very thing he feared. But he was not his father. He would not flee. He was Kronos, the king, the son of the earth, and he would not surrender his cosmos without a fight. He roared, a challenge that shook Mount Othrys to its foundations. His brothers and sisters, the other titans, heard his call. They gathered to him, their own vast powers awakening. Zeus, standing with his siblings, met his father's gaze. He, too, issued a challenge, a peal of thunder that was the first his siblings had ever heard. The lines were drawn. The 2 generations of gods, the Titans and the Olympians, stared at one another across the great hall. The war for the universe was about to begin. The cosmos was now a battlefield. This would not be a short, decisive coup like the one Kronos had committed against Ouranos. This would be a war. A long, brutal, and world-breaking war. The 2 armies established their fortresses, their domains turning into command posts. The Titans, the elder gods, held Mount Othrys. It was the ancient, established seat of power. A dark, craggy, and immense mountain, its peak scraped the starry, wounded body of Ouranos. From here, Kronos, their king, directed his forces. With him stood the majority of his siblings, Coeus, Creus, and Hyperion. And the next generation of Titans, the sons of Iapetus, Atlas, who was destined to be their greatest general, a being of grim strength and endurance, and Menodius, the doomed strength, whose pride was immense. The new gods, the 6 children of Kronos, chose a new mountain. A peak even higher than Othrys, a mountain that seemed to pierce the heavens themselves. Mount Olympus. It was pristine, gleaming, its slopes covered in cloud, its peak a place of dazzling light. It was the fortress of the future. From here Zeus, their new, chosen leader, would command. He stood with his brothers, Hades and Poseidon, and his sisters, Hestia, Hera, and Demeter. The war began. And for 9 long years, it was a stalemate. It was a conflict of unimaginable scale. We must try to imagine the sensory experience of this. It was not a war of swords and shields. It was a war of fundamental forces. When Poseidon struck the earth, it was not a simple tremor. The entire continent would split. The sound was not a crash, but a deep, groaning, tectonic shudder that lasted for minutes, a sound so low you would feel it in your bones before you heard it. The seas would rise up in response, watery hands miles high, grabbing at the slopes of Othries. When Hyperion, the Titan of light, threw a spear, it was a comet. It was a beam of pure, searing, solar fire, which would leave a molten scar across the landscape, boiling rivers and turning forests to white ash in an instant. The sound of the battle was a constant, deafening percussion. It was the sound of mountains being torn from their roots and thrown across the sky, colliding with the sound of 1,000 thunderstorms. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, of burning rock, and of the golden ichor of the gods, which spilled and steamed upon the land. The Olympians had youthful, furious energy. They had the rage of a lifetime spent in darkness, a desperate need to claim their birthright. The Titans had age, experience, and established power. They were the very pillars of the world. They were gravity. They were the sun. They were the sea. They were fighting to keep the order they had built. And so for 9 years, neither side could gain an advantage. Every Olympian assault was met by the unyielding, ancient strength of the Titans. Every Titan counterattack was parried by the desperate, chaotic, and brilliant new power of the children of Kronos. But there were those who did not fight, or who chose their sides with care. On the Titan side, Oceanus, the great world river, remained neutral. He kept to his streams, his wife Tethys beside him, refusing to join the fray. He was too vast, too ancient, to be bothered with the squabbles of his younger siblings. And on the Olympian side, Zeus gained his most crucial allies. Themis, the Titaness of divine law who had once served Kronos, saw that his rule was based on paranoia, not justice. She saw that his time was over. She defected, bringing her wisdom to Zeus's council. And most importantly, the son of Iapetus, Prometheus. The forethinker. He was a Titan, but he was a being of immense intelligence. He looked at the war, at the brute force of his uncle Kronos and his brother Atlas, and he looked at the new, dynamic energy of Zeus. His forethought told him who would win. He and his quieter, slower brother, Epimetheus, after-thinker, abandoned Mount Othries and pledged their loyalty to Zeus. Prometheus's counsel was invaluable. But even with his wisdom, even with the combined might of the 6 Olympians, the war dragged on. The stalemate was absolute. The universe was shaking itself apart, trapped in an endless, grinding conflict. Zeus knew they needed something more. They needed an advantage. They needed a different kind of power, a wilder, more primordial strength. And then his grandmother Gaia, who had watched this war with a slow, patient heart, spoke to him. She had been betrayed by Kronos, her son. She would not be betrayed again. She whispered to Zeus, her voice the rustling of leaves, the shifting of stone. "You are fighting strength with strength," she told him. "But you have forgotten the true strength. You have forgotten your uncles, my first children, whom your father left in chains. The ones I begged him to free. They languish in Tartarus. The Cyclopes, masters of the forge. The Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed. They hate your father. They hate him for their long imprisonment. Free them, my grandson. Free them, and they will give you the weapons you need to end this. They will give you the storm itself." Zeus heard his grandmother's words. He knew what he had to do. He had to descend. He had to go down, past the realms of the earth, past the domain of Hades, into the deepest, darkest pit of all. He had to go to Tartarus. The journey to Tartarus was not a simple walk. It was a descent into absolute negation. Zeus, cloaked in his own divine power, traveled down, past the roots of the mountains, past the hidden, sunless rivers that would one day be the borders of the underworld. The air, if it could be called that, grew heavy. It was not the cool, damp air of the Dictaean cave. It was a thick, oppressive, and metallic-smelling gloom. The silence was profound, a crushing weight that seemed to absorb all thought. This was the realm of Erebus, the primordial shadow. He went deeper still, until he reached the very floor of the cosmos, the border of Tartarus itself. Hesiod the poet would later say that a bronze anvil dropped from heaven would fall for 9 days to reach the earth. And it would fall for another 9 days from the earth to reach the bottom of Tartarus. It was a place surrounded by a massive, bronze wall, built by Poseidon long after the war. But now it was simply a pit, a place of pure, dark, and crushing gravity. And there in the gloom he saw them, chained with massive, unbreakable bonds of adamant, the same metal that had felled his grandfather. The Cyclopes, bronze steropes and arges. Their single, great eyes were dim, banked like coals in an untended fire. Their massive, forge-hardened bodies were slumped in despair. And near them, an even more terrible sight. The Hecatonchyres, Catos, Briareos, and Gyges. Their 150 heads were bowed, their 300 arms chained against their bodies. They were a mountain range of defeated, imprisoned flesh. They had been here since the dawn of time, imprisoned first by their father's fear, and then by their brother, S. Zeus approached them. His light, the light of the new sky, was the first thing they had seen in millennia. Their heads lifted. Their 53 eyes turned to him. They saw a new god, a son of the tyrant who had imprisoned them. They growled, a low tectonic rumble. But Zeus did not come as a conqueror. He came as a liberator. He spoke to them. He told them of his father, Kronos. He told them of the war. He told them of their sister, Rhea, and his mother. And he offered them a bargain. "I am the son of the king who chained you," Zeus said, his voice echoing in the vast, dead space. "And I have come to break those chains. Fight with me. Help me overthrow my father, your brother, and you will be free. You will see the sun. You will have your vengeance." The Cyclops' eyes began to brighten, the coals stirring into a low flame. The Hecatonchyres, 150 faces began to shift, from despair to a slow, burning, and ancient rage. Zeus raised his hands. He called upon his power, the raw energy of the sky, and he shattered the chains of adamant. The sound was the first sharp, cracking noise Tartarus had heard in an age. The Cyclopes stood, their massive bodies uncrent. They stretched their limbs, and the very ground of the pit shook. The Hecatonchyres rose. Their 300 arms were free. They flexed them, a forest of fists, and the sound was like 1,000 landslides. They were free, and they were grateful, and they were furious. They pledged their loyalty to Zeus, not just as allies but as devoted, eternal servants. They would repay this debt. "You have given us our freedom," Bronze the Thunderer said, his voice a deep explosion. "Now we will give you your victory. We will give you weapons." They did not need to leave Tartarus to begin. The pit itself became their fore. The Cyclopes, the master craftsmen, set to work. Their single eyes now burned with the heat of a supernova. They called for fire. They called for metal. And they began to hammer. The sound was deafening. It was boom, wreck, boom, wreck, a rhythm of creation. They worked with a speed and mastery that no one else possessed. They were forging power itself. They were crafting the very emblems of the new gods, the weapons that would define them. For Hades they crafted the Kyne, the helm of darkness, a helmet that, when worn, would render the wearer completely invisible, shrouding them in the shadows of Erebus itself. A weapon of terror and of stealth. For Poseidon they crafted the trident, a three-pronged spear, so powerful that when it struck the earth, it would cause earthquakes. When it struck the sea, it would boil the waves and raise catastrophic storms. It was a scepter of the earth and the water. And for Zeus, their liberator, they crafted their masterpiece. They took the fire of the forge, the power of the lightning flash steropes, and the sound of the thunderclap bronze. They captured the raw, chaotic energy of the storm and bound it to his will. They forged the Ouranos, the thunderbolt. It was not a spear. It was not a sword. It was a handful of pure, divine, incandescent power. A weapon that could shatter mountains, boil oceans, and strike a god from his throne. Zeus took the thunderbolt. He felt its weight, its hum, its electric potential singing in his hand. It felt like a part of him. He was the sky, and now he held the sky's fire. The Cyclopes were done. Now it was the Hecatoncheires' turn. They did not craft. They were the weapon. They were 300 arms, 100 on each body, and their purpose was to throw. The alliance was forged. The armory was full. Zeus led his uncles out of Tartarus. They ascended, a thundering, mountainous, and fiery host, back up into the world of light. The Titans on Mount Othries, who had been fighting the same, grinding war for 9 years, suddenly felt a change in the air. They felt the ground shake with a new, rhythmic tread. They saw the sky darken, not with night, but with a new electric tension. The 10th year of the war was beginning. And it would be the last. The final battle was not a single engagement. It was a sustained, cataclysmic assault on the very foundations of the Titans' power. The Olympians, now armed with their new divine weapons and flanked by their monstrous primordial allies, launched their final offensive. The battlefield, once just the lands between the two mountains, now encompassed the entire cosmos. It began with the new sounds. The sound of the Cyclops' forge, now on the surface, beating out a rhythm of war. And the sound of the Hecatoncheires. Catos, Briareos, and Gyges stood before Mount Othries. And they began their assault. They did not need to climb. They began to tear the earth apart. With their 300 arms, they ripped boulders the size of hills from the ground. And they began to throw them. It was not a volley. It was a storm, an unending, percussive hurricane of rock. 300 boulders in the air at any given moment. The sound was a continuous, deafening roar of stone grinding against stone, of mountains colliding in midair. The Titans had never faced anything like this. Their fortress, Mount Othries, began to crumble under the relentless bombardment. They were masters of the cosmos, but this was a force of pure, primal chaos. Atlas, their great general, tried to rally them, to throw mountains back. But what was one mountain against 300? While the Titans were pinned down, their senses overwhelmed by the sound and the fury of the hundred-handed, the 3 Olympian brothers began their attack. Hades put on the Kyne, the helm of darkness, and he vanished. We can assume, based on this power, that he was not a warrior of open combat in the same way as his brothers. His role, it would seem, was one of unseen terror and stealth, a force of psychological dread. He could move among the Titan ranks, invisible, a cold dread that seized weapons and created panic, dismantling their defenses from within. Poseidon, his new trident held high, struck the earth. He did not just create a tremor. He aimed. He struck the foundations of Mount Othries, splitting the bedrock, opening chasms that vented the fires of the deep earth. Then he turned to the sea. He called to his uncle, Oceanus, and the sea roared in answer. He raised his trident, and the waters of the world rose up, a colossal, churning wall of brine that smashed against the Titans' mountain, extinguishing their fires, washing away their defenses. The world was a canvas of shaking rock and drowning water. And then there was Zeus. He ascended. He rose above the battle, above the clouds, until he was a figure of light against the dark, starry body of Ouranos. He raised his arm, and in his hand the thunderbolt, the Kronos. He did not throw just one. He unleashed a barrage. He became the storm. He threw bolt after bolt, and the sky itself tore open. The light was blinding. It was not the gentle, warm light of Hyperion. It was a white-hot, searing and electric light that burned the very air. The sound was the breaking of reality. Each thunderbolt struck with a force that vaporized stone and sent shockwaves echoing through the cosmos. The smell of ozone was overwhelming, the air itself charged with a fatal energy. Hesiod wrote that the heat from Zeus's bolts was so intense that the entire earth seemed to catch fire. The great forests of the world burned. The oceans themselves began to boil. The steam and the smoke created a new, choking, and impenetrable darkness. The Titans were blinded by the light. They were deafened by the thunder and the roaring of the hecatonchyrs. They were shaken by Poseidon's earthquake. They were terrified by Hades's shadows. They were, for the first time, losing. Kronos, their king, saw Zeus, his son, wielding the very power of the sky, a power he had never possessed. He saw the prophecy fulfilled. He saw his own arrogance, his own fear, reflected in the blinding light of the thunderbolt. He roared one last time in defiance, but it was the roar of a defeated king. The assault was too much. The combination of primal chaos, divine weapons, and strategic, invisible terror broke their will. The Titans, the unmovable ancient gods, broke. They began to flee. But there was nowhere to flee. Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, with the help of the hundred-handed, rounded them up. They were defeated, their power broken, their bodies scarred by the fire of the sky. The 10-year war was over. The silence that fell after the final thunderbolt was as profound as the noise that had preceded it. The world was broken. The sky was scorched black with smoke. The seas were steaming. The earth was a landscape of canyons and craters. But it was quiet. The reign of the Titans was finished. The Olympians, victorious, stood on the smoking ruins of their new kingdom. Zeus, his siblings beside him, his uncles, the Cyclopes and Hecatonchyrs at his back, looked upon the new cosmos. Now came the judgment. What was to be done with their defeated predecessors? For most of the Titans, the ones who had fought against them, Kronos, Iapetus, Coeus, Creus, and the others, there would be no mercy. They had waged a war to destroy the new gods. They would be imprisoned, just as they had imprisoned their own brothers. Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon took their father, Kronos, and their uncles, and they forced them down. Down past the roots of the earth, down, 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 back into the very place Zeus had visited. They were cast into Tartarus. They who had ruled the cosmos were now in its deepest, darkest, most inescapable pit. And to ensure they never escaped, Poseidon, with his new power, crafted great gates of bronze to seal the pit. And who would guard these gates? Who could be trusted with a prison built to hold the Titans? Zeus gave the honor to his uncles, the Hecatonchyrs. Catos, Briareos, and Gyges, who had known imprisonment for so long, now became the ultimate jailers. Their 300 arms, which had won the war, would now guard the peace. They stood sentinel at the bronze gates, a living, 150-headed warning against any who would ever challenge the new order. But there were special punishments for the leaders. Menodius, the proud son of Iapetus, was struck down by one of Zeus's thunderbolts for his arrogance and banished to Erebus, the deep darkness. And then there was Atlas, the great general of the Titans, the one who had led their armies with such strength and endurance. For Atlas, Zeus reserved a unique fate. He would not be imprisoned in the dark. He, who had fought to control the cosmos, would now be forced to bear its weight. Zeus took him to the furthest western edge of the world, and he placed a new burden on his massive shoulders. He forced him to hold up the sky, to hold up Ouranos, and bear the entire weight of the heavens forever. It was a terrible, lonely, and agonizing fate. To stand for eternity, his muscles screaming, his only view the earth he had lost, his only companion the distant, starry ancestor he had failed to avenge. He was the new pillar of the world, a monument to the Olympians' victory. The war was over. The traitors were punished. The allies were rewarded. The Cyclopes became the master forgers for Zeus, with their new workshop deep within Mount Etna, the volcano's smoke a sign of their eternal work. Prometheus and Themis, the Titans who had sided with the victors, were given places of honor in the new court. And what of the victors themselves? The 6 children of Kronos and Rhea, the new rulers. The cosmos was now theirs to divide. But how to do it fairly? How to prevent the same rivalries, the same lust for a single throne that had doomed their father and grandfather? It was decided, perhaps by Themis, the new spirit of justice, that they would not fight. They would draw lots. The 3 great brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, would divide the realms of power. 3 lots were cast, each representing a domain. Hades, perhaps fittingly for the one who wore the helm of darkness, drew the lot for the underworld. He would be king of the vast, unseen realms beneath the earth. The lord of the dead, the king of all the shades and the master of the world's hidden, mineral wealth. He took his dark throne, a quiet, rich, and somber king. Poseidon, the earth shaker, drew the lot for the sea. All the oceans, rivers, and springs of the world would be his domain. He would be the master of all that flowed, his trident the symbol of his wild, tempestuous, and moody power. And Zeus, the youngest son, the one hidden in the cave, the one who had freed them all. He drew the lot for the sky. He became the new king, the Lord of heaven, the wielder of the thunderbolt, the father of gods and men. He ascended to the highest peak of Mount Olympus, the new, shining throne of the cosmos. His sisters, too, took their places of honor in this new age. Hestia, the eldest, the quietest, and the first devoured, claimed the domain of the hearth. She became the sacred, unmoving center of the home, the living flame of every sacrifice, a goddess of family and domestic peace, a calm, steady heart in the new, chaotic pantheon. Demeter, the giver of grain, took stewardship of the earth's bounty. She was the goddess of the harvest, of the fertile soil, of the cycle of planting and reaping. The golden age of the Titans was over, and now mortals would have to work and pray to Demeter for their sustenance. And Hera, the proud queen, became just that. She became the wife of Zeus, the queen of heaven. She was the goddess of marriage, of power, of the firmament of the sky, a jealous and watchful partner to the new, powerful king. The new order was established. The war was done. The cosmos, scarred and remade, finally settled into the shape we know. The age of primal chaos was over. The age of titanic rule was over. The age of the Olympians had begun. And here our story for tonight. This great, cosmic, and violent story finds its end. It is the beginning of countless other tales, of heroes and monsters, of quests and tragedies. But those are stories for another night. For now, the war is over. The universe is quiet. The new gods are on their thrones, and the old gods are dreaming in their deep, dark prison. All is still. Let the echo of this ancient conflict fade. Let the sound of thunder and the crash of mountains dissolve into the silence of your room. You have journeyed far back to the very dawn of time, and you have returned. You are safe. You are at peace. And there is nothing left to do but to let go. Begin whispered conclusion. If you've enjoyed this journey into the mythos, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more stories. It helps our channel find others who are seeking rest. But for now, that can wait. Your only task is to drift. Let your thoughts become as soft and distant as the clouds around Olympus. Let your breathing slow, and allow yourself to fall into a deep and peaceful sleep. Good night.